Thanks for everyone and joining the Rapsodo webinar today. We've got a really exciting guest. We have John Edman from La Jolla Country Day School. Also, we'll kind of get into big baseball background of John, but also father of Tommy Edman, who's hometown star here, where our office is in St. Louis with Tommy Edman. So really looking forward to diving into how to utilize Rapsodo at the high school level. With John's great background in baseball from college ball and different organizations. We're going to talk a little bit about the recruiting process. So thanks for everyone for joining. And if there are any questions, just throw that into the chat. And then at the end, we're going to leave a little time for Q&A to answer those questions. So just to start, John, thanks for joining today. Like I mentioned, big baseball background. If you don't mind kind of sharing a little bit of that background for the audience, that'd be a great start.
Sure. I guess from a playing standpoint, I played at Williams College out in Massachusetts, little Division III school out there. Loved it, had dreams of playing professionally myself, but that wasn't to be. So I got to do the next best thing, which is coach. And I've been doing it now. This is my 30th year of coaching. Love it. I coached at first for 4 years in high school in Michigan. And then I went back to grad school at University of Michigan, and I coached while I was in grad school there. I coached for 2 years, and then I had an opportunity to come out here to La Jolla and teach math and coach baseball at La Jolla Country Day School, which has been really fun for me, and coach a little club baseball like all coaches out here do, but not too much. Most of it's just our off-season kids who are playing, and then I'll usually take a middle school group in the fall, just kids that are going to end up in our program at some point. So it's a nice little change from dealing with the high school kids. I get to deal with the middle school kids at that point. It's kind of fun too. And of course, my own kids played baseball as well. I have two boys and a girl, and we tried to get Elisa into softball quite a bit, but she gravitated toward volleyball and ended up working for the Cardinals in data analytics after college. And our oldest son actually works for the Minnesota Twins, also in data analytics. And then Tommy, of course, plays for the Cardinals. And I had the pleasure of getting to coach him through his high school years, and now more or less throw in batting practice in the off season. That's my one opportunity to kind of, talk back and forth with him about hitting ideas, although he's well beyond my probably capabilities at this point. And just every now and then we have little chats about it, but it's been really fun for me to watch him and his progress and what he's been doing over time, and kind of dive in on my own to see what works and what doesn't at that level, and hope to translate it to what I get to do with the high school kids. But it's been a fun journey, really, really fun.
Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate that background with all the baseball background. And I think what's unique too is we've seen such a advancements in the analytics space, kind of starting at the MLB level, but with technologies coming out like ourselves at Rapsodo, to where our mission from day one is try to get that pro level usage at the high school level, academies. I played Division III ball myself, Anderson in Indiana. So schools like that might not have the best budget, try to get them that exposure to the data. So I'm interested, as we dive into the recruiting side, is the whole family, you have that big baseball background. You also have the math background, as you mentioned as well. So would love to dive into a little bit, like I mentioned, not only on utilizing the analytics, but also kind of like that recruiting journey. So I think we have a lot of coaches in attendance here that would love to hear from you, as you've helped so many players throughout all the years of coaching to get to that next level, and some players to the MLB as well, including Tommy. So yeah, I think a cool place maybe we could start is like the recruiting side of things, on, what are some key factors of, when players are looking at colleges, like where do you start to help them with that journey? So if like at La Jolla, players are interested in playing, maybe not D1 ball, but kind of across the board, where does that process start for you, like in helping those players?
That's a really good question. So we always do a little seminar in the off season for our kids, and it could be 8th graders all the way up through our 12th graders. And we usually have a few former players who've played in college come back and help us out with that. And awesome. Just try to give them some background into what they ought to be doing at that point, And what we found over the years is some kids start going out to showcase and events like that way too early. That really the focus ought to be on developing as a player and spending time, especially in San Diego, where we have a lot of good talent out here, staying local, being in the weight room, doing your speed training, ideally playing another sport. I always like to tell the kids that baseball doesn't necessarily develop great athletes, but if you are a great athlete, it can translate to being a great ball player. So we really encourage kids to play other sports. And our school is only 480 kids. So for us to survive at a high level athletically, we have to have multi-sport athletes. But we've also found that those kids thrive when they are playing other sports. So really early on, encouraging them to focus on their development, not so much on going to showcase. And then, late sophomore year, start making a list of schools that they're interested in. And I'll usually sit down with them and talk with them about that list and make sure that net is very wide, because you really don't know. We had a player last year who could barely hit the ball out of the infield as a sophomore. And he's one of the leading home run hitters in San Diego this year.
Oh, wow.
And for me to predict where he was going to end up collegiately, last year I had, there's no way I would have known. So for him to have that wide net is a big deal. And now he's got colleges from all over the place coming to watch him play. And you would not have predicted that last year. And he's one that just worked on developing, wasn't worried about showcasing and doing all that sort of stuff. And he's gotten bigger, stronger, faster. And obviously, he's actually got some easy power. So that's been fun to watch develop. So having that big list of schools that they're interested in, and I usually help them widen it a little bit. Say, if you're interested in this particular kind of school, I've got a few more that you might look at. And
awesome.
And then, and we make certain that they've got schools that are on the high end, that they're pies in the sky, that they don't know for sure if they can play at, but just keep it on the list. And then they also have the ones that they know, what, almost no matter what, I'll be able to play at this school. And then they have a chance to refine, how badly they want to play baseball in college. If they're kind of a marginal player, do they want to go to a school where they can play, or do they want to go to a school where they love the school, and if they can play baseball, great. So we kind of refine that whole thing. But then it's time to send information out to the schools, and when they do, that's really the idea, is to start making connections and also share information about them that might end up being intriguing to the schools, who will never recruit them without seeing them, but the information that they share might get them out to watch them play at a summer event here or there.
Sure.
And some of that information is, obviously just my contact information, but then also some concrete things like their current GPA, which obviously there's a lot of schools out there that if you don't have the grades, you're just not even in the picture.
Right.
And then any kind of metrics that we might happen to have, and any video that we might happen to have. And so that's where Rapsodo can certainly come in, because there's some concrete metrics that they can send out about where they are, for a hitter, what their exit velocities have been. And we can, in theory, send them out data that is accurate data, and Rapsodo is a known quantity. So they know what they're getting when they send that information out. So this year in particular, we had 2 late signees as pitchers who were seniors.
Awesome.
And the schools were asking for information on them, and they were kind of surprised that we had some Rapsodo data, but they wanted it, and we fired it their way, and that definitely got them at least interested enough to come watch them play. Both have nice opportunities. One is probably going to go to a junior college. His dream, I think, is to play at Arizona or Arizona State, and he's going to play at one of the better junior colleges here first.
Awesome.
And then the other is actually going on recruiting trips out east this weekend from 2 schools that have offered him an opportunity. So, and in his case, I think he did send them. I sent him one of the Rapsodo files that I think he sent on to them. which was helpful. And they obviously paired that with some video and they followed up with conversations with other people they knew in the San Diego area who had seen him throw. That's kind of the extreme where these guys are signing in May or June after their senior year, but it still does happen. That gives you a little picture. The time that I tell the kids to make sure to go out and play in front of guys is right after junior year. Some of the kids who are more developed earlier, they'll do it after sophomore year. But I mean, from an advice standpoint, that's the thing that I'm always telling kids, and I encourage other coaches to do the same with their own players, is they don't need to go out and showcase as early as a lot of them are doing. They really just need to get better and have fun playing the game and play with their buddies and just enjoy it. Sometimes the showcase thing takes some fun out of the game. And
no, that's great information. And a couple things you said, I'd love to kind of elaborate more on. One, you mentioned just getting, there is the showcase world that seems to be growing with lower ages, going to these showcases to be able to get seen. Like I mentioned, kind of to start, one of our missions is getting that professional grade data kind of to high schools, JUCO, Division III, across the board. When you brought up, sending the Rapsodo reports or the video, that is, advice I think a lot of coaches, it's something we recommend as well, is because now that we've been established for quite a while, most of those colleges are utilizing Rapsodo. They are familiar with those reports. But the video component you brought up, I love, is such an important piece, because essentially when, we recommend high school sending these reports not only to colleges, but maybe also MLB scouts if they're looking to go from high school to the draft. But when you can add that video piece as well, that's when it's not only, hey, here's what this player can do with his spin rate or exit velocity or, the break on his curveball, but hey, here's the video that pairs with it. So you can see the mechanics automatically with Rapsodo, so that you have the data and video together. So I love that you brought that up, because I know one thing we talk to a good amount of scouts and a good amount of colleges. And one thing that you can utilize at the high school level with Rapsodo is if you are getting data at that freshman level or the sophomore level, is what we kind of call like a baseline on a player early. And then if you can say, hey, look at my player's progression in 4 years, exit velocity has gone from this, but then he's developed to where he's hitting the ball 90 plus miles per hour. It paints a really good picture for a college to show, hey, here's the progression over time, and hey, here's your video throughout. So again, that's just something for any coaches listening, I think it's a great point by John of that video is an important piece so that they can see the mechanics of that athlete and maybe see some potential, in the swing to when that player gets to the college level. So love that information. And I know Rapsodo is a little newer at La Jolla. We were out there in December, able to, get you guys with the new equipment and spent some time out there. Just kind of curious, as you've gotten used to it, what's kind of the plans moving forward for Rapsodo? As you got started, is there any way in the practice plan you see the best fit, or how do you guys plan to, utilize Rapsodo moving forward for the players?
So ideally, we're going to get the data in every game that's played at our field, and we obviously have a full slate of spring games that we have, and then we will play some summer games as well. Ideally, we also have 8th, 7th grade club kids that will be on our field, and they're almost all country day kids, and to be able to do it during those games. And obviously, the big challenge is making certain that we have somebody there who can run the laptop during the game, who knows what they're doing. So I'm going to have to do some training on that. This year, because we really got the system partway through the year, we had an 8th grade player who's really smart, who we really quickly took through how to get it going, and he was the one that ran it for us. So awesome. And he did a really nice job with that. And I mean, because I was in the middle of coaching, I didn't have a chance to really spend a ton of time doing it myself. I just passed it over to him and let him run with it. And then we came up with a couple of ideas about how we wanted to do something a little bit differently to get slightly different data. And that in particular had to do with putting in information about in the pitching notes.
Awesome.
And so we talked about how he might do that. And he was pretty much the one that ran it. Now we're about to start summer ball shortly. And when we do, I have one of my assistants in charge of the summer team, and I'm his assistant. So I think what I'm going to do is sit down and run the Rapsodo during the games, give kids feedback between innings and that kind of thing, but then
Awesome.
make certain that I know everything about its functionality so that when I've got to train other people to run it, it won't be that big a deal. Now, obviously, one of the questions is, do we have a parent run it, and do we want parents in our dugout?
Sure.
And that's definitely a question for us. Or do we make certain that we've got some good student managers that can do it? Although we don't always have those kids in the summer. So that definitely is one thing we have to think through. But it honestly, for an 8th grader to learn it that quickly and get effective data means that it's something that's going to be very doable for us.
Yeah, awesome. That's great to hear. And so I'd started with Rapsodo when I was a senior in college in 2016. So since my time with Rapsodo, I've really seen the analytics in the game grow as well, and the interest. So it's neat to hear you say that with like running it in game and students, because I think one of the coolest things we've seen in our first year of stadium. So for coaches and everyone listening, John's kind of talking through our new stadium unit, which is the first ever off the field Rapsodo unit for in game. We're kind of really known for more on the bullpen, batting cage, can be used for live scrimmages. But this summer is our first time for the stadium unit that hopefully you've seen at something like an ABCA. But John, to your point, one of the neatest things I've seen is we even have like high school students interested in wanting to go into analytics to where it's a really good first opportunity to get your hands on in-game data, how that data is shown in the reports and also the files to build models. Because one thing neat at Rapsodo is we do get brilliant interns from college and high school summer interested in analytics, and they get this experience and they get picked up by MLB teams, which is really, really neat because all these teams are growing their analytic departments. So I think that's a great example you mentioned there, is if there are students for the stadium side of course it's a player development tool and get players recruited, but also the other side of the analytics and, students interested in that side of the game. It's a great first way to get experiences with that data. So really cool to hear you say that as well. And then talking on the 3.0 side, our newer unit that can do the live on live capability. What are some plans with that guy? Is that something that, in the fall, you'll do things like baseline to understand maybe incoming freshmen, what their fastball looks like, their curveball, to make those type of adjustments before you get into in-game, or what are some things you've learned with utilizing the 3.0?
So we have the pitching device and we have the 3.0, and now we have the stadium unit. And our intent is to have the pitching device always going in our bullpen,
Awesome.
gathering data. And I mean, the one thing, of course, we have to be careful of is giving the kids too much information as they're down in the bullpen, because they fall in love with velocity and now all they're trying to do is throw they can. And so we temper that, and we make certain that we gather the information, look at it ourselves, and then meet with the guys to talk about what we might do a little differently, with a couple of exceptions. The one thing that I think is really effective is to say, well, let's try this with your hand position or your grip on this baseball and just see what happens with spin rates. And that is really cool to be able to tell immediately, like the effect right here, right now is this. So what did you just do on that last pitch? Because all of a sudden your spin rate jumped, 10%. So let's see how we can leverage that a little bit. So that's pretty neat down in a bullpen. For us, where we've got our facility placed, the 3.0 is going to be in our cages quite a bit, so that we can gather tons and tons of swing data and get a sense of what a particular player's exit velocity is and what his launch angle is, so that we can make certain that they are because obviously if a kid has a ridiculous exit velocity, we'd like them to get that launch angle up a little bit. When they don't have that ridiculous exit velocity, we need a whole lot more line drives. So to be able to give that information to the kids who typically they're in the cages and they're not directionless by any means. I think they know when they've hit a ball well, but the data gives them something very concrete to look at and say, all right, so I'm hitting the ball typically 84 miles an hour, and my current launch angle is, 45 degrees.
Right.
I don't know that that's going to work very well for me. And it might have felt like I hit the ball very well for me, but outcome, we're going to fly out. And so let's try to figure out how we're going to get you to, 20-degree launch angle. And what does that mean? What's it feel like? What's it look like? And that sort of thing. So it just gives some really good feedback to a kid, especially for us in a cage where they don't see
Right.
where the ball ended up.
And
it might have felt good, but it's not going to play.
Yep. That's something we like to speak to quite a bit, is like, especially like you mentioned, you played in the North as well, where we don't have that beautiful South Carolina or Southern California weather. So you are in a cage a lot for, a lot of the country. So that's something we speak to quite often, is that when you do utilize the unit, you can see where that ball would have flown, in an actual, field type of setting. But also you mentioned like, at the high school level, maybe the MLB average launch angle is like 29 degrees on a home run. But if you're hitting that ball around 80 miles per hour, it's probably getting caught quite often if it's not in the gap. So it's really cool to hear you say as well. Because also I know a challenge is, at the high school level, maybe the amount of time you get with the players. So it's not maybe as much as a college where you have more time with the athletes. And also, like you mentioned, having them play other sports as well to get full development. So you might not have the most time, but being able to utilize the session types of, okay, we do have these fall practices. Our pitchers are just doing low intent sessions on the Diamond app right now because they're working up to ramping up for, higher intensity bullpens. So that's something we always suggest as well, is utilizing those session types so that when you do turn on the unit and do high intent, especially on the pitching side, that's a perfect report for the recruiting process, and be, hey, here is a 30 pitch bullpen at high intent for my player. I know you mentioned on the hitting side as well. We've heard a lot of coaches do a great job with understanding like their strengths and weaknesses, even if that's in the fall, because on that Rapsodo report, you can see, the 9-box quadrant where, hey, the top 3 quadrants, to your example, your average launch angle is 45 degrees. Like for some reason, we're popping that up. How can we get better contact in that part of the zone? So it's great to hear you talk through, utilizing the reports and kind of seeing that even if the fall, maybe, less time. And then when the spring comes around, it's really focusing on gameplay. So I think that's an important thing of being able to utilize those sessions and reports to get quick feedback to players on, hey, we got some bullpen data in your curveball. I think if you made a little adjustment, you're going to get more vertical break. Let's play around with that as we get higher intent into the fall, so that, that curveball breaks 3-4 more inches in the spring. So it's great to hear you talk through that, like on the player development side, because there is really those two sides, right, that we're talking through. Is there's the recruiting side where it's so important nowadays for data to make its way to the scouts and players, but also like you've done such a great job developing players for so many years of baseball to where now, those analytics is just another tool of maybe the same teachings you've had, but maybe some qualitative examples of, hey, the velocity is going up a bit because of this, or the curveball breaks going up a little bit because of this change we've made, where hopefully the athlete can make that connection with, seeing it right there on the screen.
Yeah, it definitely gives a little bit more buy-in when you say, let's try making this little change. And when we do, we see what happens. Without data, they might feel it, they might not. And we might, as coaches, see it and not know if they felt it, or, and we can tell them, yeah, it was better. Well, right. With data, you actually can say concretely, yeah, look at this. And it does create a little additional buy-in, which is awesome. And honestly, the kids love metrics. They get so excited looking at what they've done. And it's just so much more concrete than a feel thing.
Awesome. Yeah, that's actually interesting. I have a question for you on that. One of our hopes is, through the baseball practices, you mentioned like the excitement from players. Are there times that you do utilize like metrics for like competition related things, or do you see like a level of energy maybe come up when a player knows, hey, we're seeing our exit velocity and I want to beat my buddy who just hit 192, where maybe if you didn't have something, capturing that, you can maybe start going through the motions a little bit more, especially like I mentioned, like, playing ball up in the north where you are in the cage and get a little repetitive. Is that something you've seen since implementing Rapsodo, where the guys you see that level of competition go up a little bit and energy? Is that something you noticed?
They, I mean, in the time that the 3.0 is fairly new to us still.
Right.
So that's the place where I think we're going to get a ton of competition, and they were all hovering around it. We really got it fired up more toward the end of our winter ball season, and they were all hovering around it, watching what the numbers were and that sort of thing. But we didn't create what we'd like to next winter, which is kind of a league within our school, where maybe we have a team of guys who are grouped together, and they're as a team trying to create an exit velocity average that beats another team. And so it's kind of a team thing, not just an individual thing. And we've found that kind of thing works. So that's our intent for this coming winter, is to really kind of have a league, and the league will be a group of players, and we'll try to group them so that they're fairly evenly matched early. And it'll be, in my opinion, I think it's going to be a good way to see what their development was like, but also, push each other, because they're actually trying to make their team win. And and they'll, the more that I find that the players help each other with things, the better that they all get, both because they might have to explain something to their own partner, but also because they want to impress each other. And and I think it develops kind of a sense of team. Baseball can become an individual sport, especially when you start talking the showcase circuit. And for us to keep on focused on how I can improve myself to help the team, that's all really positive. So that's kind of our reason for wanting to make it a team thing. And obviously within the team thing, they get to see how they individually do, which, they can take some pride in. But I think the team component is going to be really helpful to them and to us.
Awesome. Yeah, that's all great to hear. And like I mentioned, kind of our hope is, we know the stadium's a little newer, and you got the 3.0 now, but for coaches out there and organizations that do have that combination, that you can get so much work done in the fall and the winter with things like the competition you mentioned, John, pitch development, pitch design, or maybe a curveball. And then once the spring comes around and that stadium unit's fired up and players can show the adjustments they've made from the practice setting to that in-game data, the overall mission for us is to get those players to, recruited to college, maybe players that if there wasn't any data that would have gone unseen. And the same with, the draft, that when a player can make those developments and have, a better curveball and maybe have a shot at the draft. So that's all great information. Appreciate you talking through it. I know we are getting a little closer on time, so we did just have one more question before we open it up for Q&A. Kind of a broad question, but we've talked a little bit about it. When we're talking back kind of on the recruiting side, is there any key pieces of advice? I know you had a great kind of overview of, the recruiting process. Is there anything that stands out to you that's most important for coaches or players that from all of your years of helping these players that gets those players to the next level? The way, any key points there that stand out of the process that are really important to check off for coaches to get those players to college?
That's a good question. So I think there's a couple things. Like I said before, make that net wide to begin with, because there's a lot of kids who have that hope that they are at a certain level, and it turns out that they're not quite there. And to have been in communication with coaches at lots of different levels is really helpful as the process starts going on, and we're not getting offers from the very top of the top that they were hoping for. And they still have lots and lots of other options in play. So that would be one thing, is keep the net wide. And, hopefully you've got a relationship with your players where you can be real with them about where, as they're developing, where they really fit. Because again, sometimes kids are scared to hear that. Maybe they're scared to come to their high school coach because they are afraid of what they're going to say about where they fit, and it may not be exactly where they want to fit. So being real is definitely helpful. having that focus on early development. And when, we just are having exit meetings at the end of our season right now. And part of our conversation for the younger kids is about what their plans are for the summer. And for us to reiterate that the player development is super important. Like I find when kids are on the road all summer, they don't lift enough, they don't eat well,
Right.
They don't sleep well, and we're in Southern California. They don't get to go to the beach and have some time off and be away from the field a little bit. And the players that we've had that have ended up being the best ball players are ones that are around San Diego most of the summer. They're not on the road every weekend.
Sure.
And then communicate really, really well with coaches. So a lot of the college coaches I've talked to have said, you can send us a summer schedule in June, but we're so busy. We're not going to go back and look at every kid's summer schedule.
Right.
If you've got something going on this week, let me know on Sunday or whatever day you choose to be your day to communicate with coaches and say, here's where I'm going to be this week. And, really you only need to do that if it's if you're reaching out to coaches who might be at those particular events that you're going to be at. But reach out to them, routinely. And it's a good process for our kids to go through, because I think high school boys in general are not very good communicators. So to learn to do that well is a skill that they'll take with them the rest of their lives. But to just have they can have an alert on their phone to remind them, reach out to college coaches. It's a Sunday afternoon thing or whatever day they choose to do that, and let them know where you're going to be and when you're going to be there. So we have an event locally here put on by, and again, this is now our juniors, rising seniors who are going to go out to, and it's Saturday, Sunday. And so I was just talking to one of our players, make sure you know who's going to be there and reach out to all the coaches of the schools you're interested in that are going to be there and let them know, because you might be totally overlooked. Like they don't even look for you. There's 100 kids there and they don't notice you. But if you have reached out to them and told them you're going to be there, they're going to look for that particular kid and, know that he's interested, know that he'd like to play. And not to mention the fact that I think the more they hear from you, not an obsessive amount, but, before each event, they put it, they recognize that name over and over and over again. And they say, who is this Johnny Smith?
Sure.
And they'll make certain, and it also makes you stand out because you're communicating well, which again, not every high school boy does.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think that's great points and great advice. Really appreciate you sharing those. I like what you mentioned, like casting a wide net, like can't hurt getting all the options out there. The communication side, like you mentioned, like these college coaches already have so much going on. So that nice, clean communication can be really helpful. And, kind of have a callback to what you mentioned earlier on utilizing the data as, they're already sending GPA information, maybe character type information of what that player's like. But a big piece of that puzzle is, hey, here's a spin rate, or hey, here's an exit velocity, and here's video of that athlete as well for hopefully a full picture. So that's
Right.
awesome advice. Really appreciate the time on that, John. And I know we're out of time now. Could have talked a lot longer, but really appreciate all that information you shared. Hopefully a lot of information there for the coaches and the recruiting and using Rapsodo. So again, thanks for the time, John. Always great to see you, and looking forward to continuing to talk with you through the stadium and Rapsodo usage in future years.
All right. Sounds great. Let me know if I can do anything for you.
Awesome. Well, thanks, John. I really appreciate the time.
All right. No problem. Take care.